relax your mind and paradise, 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 paradise. Sun, moon, and stars and beautiful sea. Anguilla is where I want to be. There is nowhere in this whole wide world. Anguilla's the only place for me. Time to eat, get a local dish. There's nothing like a steam snapper fish. If you want to know what life is worth, Anguilla is heaven and not life. Paradise, 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 paradise. Sun, moon, and stars and beautiful seas. Anguilla is where I want to be. There is nowhere in this whole wide world. Anguilla's the only place for me. August Monday is a sight to see. Join in the fun, come dance with me. Sunny ground is the real McCoy. Let's survive our pride and joy. Paradise, paradise, oh Lord, paradise. It's paradise. Ah, 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 yeah, yeah, yeah. Sun, moon, and stars and beautiful seas. Anguilla is where I want to be. There is nowhere in this whole wide world. Anguilla's the only place for me. Anguilla, Anguilla, hey. Anguilla, Anguilla, paradise. Anguilla, Anguilla, it's water like in Anguilla. Anguilla, Anguilla, hey. Paradise. Morning, Mom. Morning, Dad. Hi, brother. Hi, sister. Sir. Hi, neighbor. Hi, friend. Vacation. Welcome to my island. There is nowhere in this whole wide world. Anguilla's the only place for me. Anguilla, 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 Anguilla. Welcome to my lovely island, Anguilla. Sun, moon, and stars and beautiful seas. Anguilla is where.
Test. Good night, everybody. And welcome to District 4's debate. We'll now stand for the national song, please.
God bless Anguilla, natural. Noble and beauteous she stands with the sea. Oh, land of the happy, a heaven will make thee. All life and love we give unto thee. With heart and soul we build our nation proud, strong and free. We love her, hold her dear to our hearts for eternity. Let truth and right the banner be. We'll march ever on. Let truth and right the banner be. We'll march ever on. Mighty will make her, long may she prosper. God grant her leaders wisdom and grace. May glory and honor ever attend her. Firm shall she stand throughout every age. With heart and souls we'll build our nation proud, strong and free. We love her, hold her dear to our hearts for eternity. Let truth and right the banner be. We'll march ever on. Let truth and right the banner be. We'll march ever on.
Thank you very much. Bow your heads. Continue standing, please. Bow your heads for prayer, please. Dear Lord, we thank you for bringing us here safely to this momentous occasion. We ask your guidance and direction on tonight's proceedings. We ask that all be done to give you glory. In Jesus' name, amen. You may be seated. I'd like to now welcome our two candidates for tonight's debate. Mr. Victor Banks, give him a round of applause, please. Okay. As well as Miss Deanne Kentish Rogers. Thank you very much. See that you guys are very enthusiastic tonight. Anyways, I am happy to turn over tonight's proceedings to our moderators for the night, Miss Roxana Brooks, who's a youth advocate, and as well as Jibril Lewis, who is the district representative for District Number 1 of the Anguilla Youth Parliament.
Thank you, Neil, and good evening, everyone. I'll begin this evening by going through the purpose of the debates. Nominees contesting the upcoming 2020 elections will be given a chance to debate several areas of sustainable development. These debates seek to allow candidates to appeal to young voters and express their plans to achieve youth development nationally. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, adopted by all United Nations member states in 2015, provides a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet now and into the future. At its heart are the 17 Sustainable Developmental Goals, SDGs, which are an urgent call for action by all countries, developed and developing, in a global partnership. They recognize that ending poverty and other deprivations must go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequality, and spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and forests.
A few ground rules. Firstly, each candidate will be given 3 minutes to give an opening statement. Candidates will be then given 5 questions from the Anguilla National Youth Council on Sustainable Development Goals. Each candidate will be given a maximum of 3 minutes to respond to the question. In this section, the candidate is only to refer to the moderator in his or her response. After candidate has been given an opportunity to respond, a maximum of 2 minutes will be given to each candidate to rebut the stance of their opponent or share further information on the question or topic if so desired. Only in this rebuttal section are candidates allowed to respectfully refer to their opponents. After the initial 5 questions, questions will be fielded from the virtual and live audience. Questions must be posed to all candidates. Questions with hidden agendas or may seem confrontational will not be asked. The questions can be sent to axayouthcouncil@gmail.com. One more time, that's axayouthcouncil@gmail.com. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to answer each question from the audience with a 1-minute rebuttal if so desired. After this segment is complete, candidates will be given 3 minutes to give a closing statement. If questions are not clear, kindly ask the moderator to repeat the questions.
Christian, it was my understanding that the opening statement would be 5 minutes. You mentioned 3 minutes?
The opening statement will be 3 minutes.
Okay.
Some rules for the audience.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go with 5 minutes for the opening statements. Please be advised.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the audience, these are your rules. To ensure a debate of quality, we ask that you respect all candidates. This is not a political rally. It is a debate, and we ask you to respect the place. Please ensure all phones are on silent or on vibrate. The audience is not allowed to applaud or make any noise of any kind to interrupt the response of any candidate. Any audience member that insists on doing such will be asked politely to leave. No one is allowed to go down to the public library, and I'm asking once again to please be respectful.
At this time, we would like to take a minute to thank our sponsors. First, the Government of Anguilla, Flow, Titanium Audio and Visuals, Pink Mako, Ashley & Sons, and Aranel Water. At this time, we would like to invite Mr. Banks to lead us with our opening statements. Again, that's 5 minutes for the opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. First of all, let me congratulate the Department of Youth and Culture and the National Youth Council for conducting these very exciting and informative debates over the past weeks. I've attended every single one of them, and I have been impressed with the level of professionalism that you have displayed. It is not easy to manage politicians at any time, never mind in the middle of a heated political campaign. Give them a round of applause. Secondly, I would welcome my opponent. I would like to welcome my opponent to this debate, Ms. Deanne Kentish-Rogers, to what I would expect would be a very cordial encounter in which both of us will strive to clearly articulate the issues in the responses that we make to the several questions that will be raised. These questions will, of course, relate to the very important pathway to transforming our world and, of course, our beloved country, Anguilla. And last but certainly not least, I want to thank our dutiful audiences who have come in their numbers to support the participants as well as to be informed about their vision for Anguilla. I'm sure that all the participants, like me, are humbled by your massive presence. I want to further commend the Department of Youth and Culture and the National Youth Council for framing these debates within the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. As a consequence, it puts all these questions in a global space with young people at the core, bearing in mind that young people must be the experts and the leaders of what is being envisioned for our world. But having said all of the foregoing, we must be careful not to use the concept of youth leadership simply as a buzzword. I personally admire, respect, and applaud every single young person who has displayed the courage to be vying to be an active participant in this political process. Give them a round of applause. It is clear that Anguilla has a bright future as well as a bright present, because the future political landscape can be changed in the next 13 days. Am I right? Yes. Good. And I'm proud that our government made sure that the Constitution was amended to allow for wider representation in the House of Assembly, thus increasing the opportunity for robust youth participation through the electoral process. This can only augur well for our country. I use the phrase through the electoral process because I am also proud that our government extended the opportunity in February 2019 to a 23-year-old brilliant young man to be the first nominated member of the House of Assembly as well as Deputy Speaker. He is the youngest Anguillan ever to have held these positions, and now at 25, he has hopes of replacing me as the youngest elected representative since the Westminster system of government was established in Anguilla by the 1976 Constitution. Just for the record, though, because history is important, the youngest elected parliamentarian from Anguilla to the Cinques Nevis Anguilla legislature was the late Walter Griffith Hodge, and that was at the age of 23. So youth has indeed played a prominent part in our history over the years, and I expect it will continue to be so. And so, I eagerly await your questions and sincerely hope that our responses will be just the beginning of your research into determining the part that you wish to play in the vision we have outlined. But even better, I would hope that you are inspired to formulate your own ideas for how Anguilla can make progress on the pathway to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, not only for Anguilla, but in cooperation with the rest of the world to make it work. Thank you all very much, and let's look forward to a cordial encounter where we can share ideas. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kentish Rogers.
Thank you. Moderators, listening and viewing audience, to my opponent, the Honorable Premier, Mr. Victor Banks, good evening. I am here to propose that the best option for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals in Anguilla is under an Anguilla Progressive Movement administration, of which I am a candidate. My foray into politics began in 2009 at the age of 16, when alongside Quincy Gums-Marie, another candidate, we organized the first ever district debates to be held in Anguilla. I am pleased that at a time when we now decided to enter the political arena as candidates vying for political office, the Anguilla National Youth Council has answered the call and preserved the space for serious discussion on issues of national importance. This debate is addressing the issue of sustainability, which is of great importance to the current Anguillan reality. The APM has embraced the inclusion, particularly of the youth, and as such is best poised to champion issues of sustainability, as our generation are the ones who will be tasked to find solutions for the problems we will encounter for the foreseeable future. The destruction of our financial institutions, the diminished ability of our young people to achieve home ownership, marginalization of small businesses, and our high energy costs are all issues which are pressing for the youth of Anguilla. Time magazine's 2019 Person of the Year was Greta Thunberg. She is 17 years old and an international climate change activist who is taking on governments in the developed world by shaping policy on global climate change agendas. She began her advocacy at the age of 15. I am Deanne Kentish-Rogers. I am 27 years old. I'm a former Commonwealth Games heptathlete. I'm the first Black woman to win the title of Miss Universe Great Britain. I have a law degree, a strong voice, humility, compassion, and integrity. I am running for public office because Anguilla needs a criminal justice system that focuses more on rehabilitation than punishment and prosecution. I am running because we need to create an environment where employers can profit, but employees are also respected and legally protected. I am running because young Anguillians need affordable housing options. I am running because our teachers need support and our education system needs to adjust to meet the demands of both local and the global market. I am running so that the money we save from excessive government expenditure can service the massive debt that is looming over our heads and fund sustainable development projects. I am running because Anguillians will reconsider Anguilla as home and will not continue to flee Anguilla because of dwindling opportunities and stagnation in their own country. I am running so that we can diversify our tourism product while bolstering our agricultural and fishing industries. Anguilla, I have traveled all around the world to run races in your name, but this race is the most consequential one, and I intend to finish it with integrity. Thank you.
Thank you both for your opening remarks. We will begin this evening's debate with the SDGs. You both have 5 questions. After I read the first question, which goes to Ms. Kentish-Rogers, you will both have 1 minute to prepare, after which, Ms. Kentish-Rogers, you will have a maximum of 3 minutes to answer, after which Mr. Banks will go ahead, and then we will go through rebuttals. The questions will be posted on the screen in front of you, just in case you need to refresh your memory. The first question: what are the top 3 skill sets that should drive our educational system to enable school leavers to thrive in the present global landscape? I'll repeat. What are the top 3 skill sets that should drive our educational system to enable school leavers to thrive in the present global landscape? This comes from SDG 1, 4, and 11. The minute is up. I'll repeat, audience, please put your phone on silent, on vibrate, or turn it off. Ms. Kentish Rogers, I'll repeat the question one more time. What are the top 3 skill sets that should drive our educational system to enable school leavers to thrive in the present global landscape? This comes from SDGs 1, 4, and 11. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. The global landscape has changed remarkably in the past 3 months as a result of COVID-19. And we've seen the increasing importance of tooling our students with the skills necessary for being competitive in the global industry. We've seen the importance of food security, agriculture. We've seen the importance of our virtual skills and our technical skills, as you can see from those sitting to my left. And we've also seen the importance of tooling our young people with an integrationalist approach to problem solving. The APM's platform is based on tooling our children with the skills needed to survive in this modern landscape. One of the ways in which we intend to ensure that our students are able to compete in this modern landscape is implementing a tracking system in the schools so that we can identify our students' various training and labor needs. Whilst doing so, and bolstering our education system that focuses on STEM subjects, technology, and robotics, we can then tool our students to take advantage of new and emerging markets, from Anguilla to the global markets. We already know that artificial intelligence is taking a growing role in this economy. However, as it stands in our Anguillan education system, we have not put a hardcore focus on equipping our students with the skills needed to take advantage of artificial intelligence. Therefore, it is important for us as government ministers, when we become them, that we take advantage of these opportunities and support our education system in their quest of tooling our students to best take advantage of the global landscape. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Banks, do you need me to repeat the question? Okay. No need?
It is important that we continue to carry on the trend of our education system into the future. It has evolved over the years, and it has evolved keeping in mind the changing global landscape. At present, the key tools that are required for young people to survive in the global landscape is the ability to acquire the skills for ICT, information communication technology. This is the way where every single sector of the economy is headed. Whether you are in agriculture, whether you're in law, whether you're in medicine, these tools are important to carry you through. So there must be a focus on the secondary level in particular, because on the primary level, we've already begun to see that our young people are getting acquainted with the technology. It's important that they start at that age. But increasingly, we need to harness those skills and nurture them during the primary and the secondary levels of our training so that they can move on to tertiary levels with those skills in place. It's important also that they learn to read and communicate properly. Reading is a critical aspect of the tools that we require to operate in the global landscape. You must be able to read and understand the material, not only be able to use the technology, but understand what the technology is saying to you. And you must be able to input into that technology, critical learning that you have acquired in those areas of competence, whether it's in law, whether it's in medicine, whether it's in agriculture, those areas which are very important at this time. And the third one, of course, in my view, is to continue to improve on our ability to present the vocational and training aspect of our education system, because everybody is not going to be able to manage the global landscape in the in information communications technology, or in the area of maths and academics. So we need to put vocational training in place so that we can get technical skills to take the young people forward.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. I'll now allow 2 minutes to Ms. Kentish Rogers to rebut.
Well, what is also important for us going forward in terms of equipping our young people with the skills needed to advance on the global landscape is to secure early learning in our languages. So instituting teaching at the primary school level of at least one of the modern languages, so either Spanish, French, or Mandarin, because we know that Mandarin is an emerging language. So that is something that is really needed in order to equip our students with the skills to advance. Now, we talked about the need for reading, the need for literacy, but currently in Anguilla, there's a bit of a mismatch, because literacy isn't as focused on in our systems. And when I say literacy isn't focused on, what I'm saying is, when our students reach into our system, when they go from primary school to high school, there isn't really a stop valve for us to check and see whether or not our students have the basic learning for the basic skills. So our students sometimes get caught within the rushing tides of the river, straight through primary school and the high school level. There's no place where we can stop and say, at third grade or third form, and we can check on our students to ensure that they have the core skills, the core subjects before they leave our school system. So I think that's one of the things that we need moving forward to ensure that our students are equipped even at the basic level of operating in a global landscape and even in the Anguillian landscape. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kentish Rogers. Before I allow Mr. Banks to rebut, ladies and gentlemen, I know we are all adults and we can follow rules. This is the final time I'm going to say, please mute your phones, or I will ask you to leave. Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Of course, in connection, in addition to the top 3 skill sets that we mentioned, what's important is the overarching attitude, discipline, and approach that students must have. And that kind of training can only come from within well-supportive families, from teachers, from groups within the community that work with young people in the churches and so on and so forth, to make sure that we have a wholesome youngster who, even though he has the skill set, also requires that kind of approach and attitude to delivering those skills. Too often we find people who are well-trained, but they are not able to cope with the challenges that they would face within the global landscape. You go out there with the skills in ICT, you go in there with the reading skills, you go in there with your professions, but at the end of the day, if you don't have the correct attitude, it's going to be a challenge to really make it out there in the world. So it's important that underlying all those skill sets, that they are placed within an attitude and approach that can assist them in making it in the world.
right, thank you. Moving right ahead to question number 2. Mr. Timothy Antoine, the governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, stated it is impossible to diversify our economies of the Caribbean away from tourism. To what extent do you agree or disagree with this statement? SDG 8. One more time. Mr. Timothy Antoine, the governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, stated that it is impossible to diversify our economies of the Caribbean away from tourism. To what extent do you agree or disagree with this statement? SDG 8. You will be given 1 minute to prepare statements, and after which we will start with Mr. Banks. That was 1 minute. I'll repeat the question one more time. Mr. Timothy Antoine, the governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, stated that it is impossible to diversify our economies of the Caribbean away from tourism. To what extent do you agree or disagree with this statement? SDG 8. Start with Mr. Victor Banks.
I know Mr. Timothy Antoine very well, but I disagree with the use of the word impossible. It's a very strong word. And whereas I agree that it's difficult to diversify away from economies that depend on tourism when all you have are tourism resources, it is also possible to diversify within the tourism in this sector. And there are opportunities for that. For example, in Anguilla, some of the products for tourism include agriculture, fisheries, and a certain level of manufacturing as well, but also financial services for the clients, customers, the patrons who come to Anguilla. So there are opportunities on that end. So it is not impossible. Impossible is a strong term, but there are opportunities that can help us to diversify in the tourism sector as linkage industries to tourism. And at some point, these industries can even outrun tourism in terms of the returns to the economy. For example, in the BVI, even though they have tourism resources, they found themselves in a financial services niche. Similar in Cayman Islands, they found themselves in a financial services niche. In Anguilla, we are also pursuing a number of niches in financial services. We're also looking at special economic zones for knowledge-based industries. The exclusive economic zone, the exclusive fishing zone that we have, we can exploit those resources to benefit tourism, but also, if we are able to exploit them well, they can become industries in themselves. I'm not saying necessarily they can compete with tourism, because every country now has a level of tourism within the economies. So I would not use the word impossible, but I think that is challenging, it's difficult to diversify our economies of the Caribbean away from tourism. As a matter of fact, most economies have a tourism sector. Some of them are much stronger than others. We in the Caribbean do not have a tourism sector which can work along with the resources that we have in the way that other countries do, but we have an opportunity to diversify within the tourism industry.
I shall repeat the question one more time. Mr. Timothy Antoine, the governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, stated that it is impossible to diversify our economies of the Caribbean away from tourism. To what extent do you agree or disagree with this statement? SDG 8. Mrs. Kentish Rogers.
Thank you. I'd like to start by saying I don't know Mr. Timothy Harris Antoine that well, but I disagree with his statement that it is impossible to diversify our economies away from tourism. I think that fundamentally it comes down to a matter of political will. If you have the will to move away from it, then you will find a way. In our economies, we already have existing industries within Anguilla that are underdeveloped and not supported by government initiatives. We have a manufacturing section to our industry that isn't given sufficient attention or support. So they are already competing against international markets in our market, even though if we were to export our products, they would have special protections. The international market would already have special protection for themselves. So what I would say is we need to look at how we can strengthen our local industries, how we can implement an import substitution policy similar to what Trinidad has and Jamaica. They both have import substitution policies, which provide some protection and incentives to local manufacturers to get into the production of certain products. For instance, in Anguilla, we have Fire Farm hot pepper. That's a really good example of how we have existing industries, but we need government to step in and take it further. Because what we can do with industries like that is use that as an export market for Anguilla. Imagine having a branded product that is in shops all across the region saying made in Anguilla, that is identified with our personal brand. And that is important because when you look at places like Jamaica, they have that already. Red Stripe, that is their brand. That's part of their cultural identity. So when we're looking at diversifying into industries like agriculture and manufacturing, or even into sports, because we have another industry, sports tourism, which is actually quite low-hanging fruit. We have the John T. Memorial Race, which could be packaged as an international tourist cycling event to attract more tourists to our island. And that is part of looking outside the box. Even when you're looking at our existing infrastructure, yes, we are limited in our existing infrastructure, but we have the John T. Memorial, we have the Anguilla Tennis Academy, and they had recently last year a program where they had over 100 people from Russia, China, Colombia coming here, staying in our resorts, staying in our accommodation, eating our food, putting money into our economy. So that kind of, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Both candidates will be now given 2 minutes to rebut, starting with Mr. Banks.
Well, I just want to say that the issues that Ms. Kentish mentioned are actually taking place in our country today. We have a certain level of sports tourism, we have a certain level of manufacturing, we have a certain level of agriculture taking place, we have a certain level of entertainment tourism. These things, when you add them up, still cannot replace tourism. So we cannot diversify our economies totally away from tourism. These are linkage industries for tourism. They cannot stand on their own. Of course, in the entertainment industry, like in the case of Bob Marley in Jamaica, he would have made a great impact internationally, and the Jamaican economy would have leveraged his popularity and his acclaim worldwide as a part of their brand. And those are the ways that these things benefit. But at the end of the day, they still come back to tourism. And there are a number of statements that Ms. Kentish made that are totally incorrect in terms of government's support for industries. We have continued to support industries. I know a number of members on the platform would have said that we don't have a manufacturing policy. By the end of the day, a manufacturing policy will come. It's a process that needs to take place. It's kind of directed to one particular industry. A manufacturing policy calls for legislation. It calls for research. It calls for a whole range of things to make sure that it fits within the overall economic development plan of Anguilla. But in the meantime, government continues to support small sector projects with duty-free concessions that enables them to be able to create good businesses. That is real. That is happening. In agriculture, it is automatic that you get the support that you need. There's some who require some further support. In fishing, that's as well. So it's important that we go on and continue with the process.
Thank you very much. And now, Ms. Kentish Rogers.
Well, I don't believe that my opponent has really pointed out what exactly I said that's incorrect. But to start with a limiting belief is to start with the belief that your people cannot achieve something. And I believe that if we really wanted to accomplish something, it takes the political will to get it done. Now, we're talking about tourism and we're talking about moving forward because I'd like to clarify that I never said that we're moving away from tourism. I just said I disagree with the moot point that it is impossible. So, going forward, I just want to clarify that having a manufacturing policy, yes, it's about legislation, but my opponent has been in government for the past 5 years, and if it's about creating that legislation, he could have done so. Because there are young entrepreneurs who want to create in this economy, who want to create uniforms, who want to create carnival costumes, who want to create byproducts from agricultural development programs. So it's not a matter of just saying, this is not possible in Anguilla. We have to have the belief in our people that we can do it because that's where it starts. It starts with the seed and it grows to the tree. And that is how Jamaica grew the way it grew, just like that Bob Marley product. Why can't we believe in Anguilla the same way?
Thank you, Ms. Kentish Rogers. We now move to question number 3. In what ways is gender inequality a barrier to sustainable development? And how would your administration seek to address gender inequality? This comes from SDG 5 and 11. I'll repeat. In what ways is gender inequality a barrier to sustainable development? And how would your administration seek to address gender inequality? This comes from SDGs 5 and 11. You have 1 minute to prepare, after which, Ms. Kentish Rogers, you will begin. I'll repeat the question one more time. In what ways is gender inequality a barrier to sustainable development? And how would your administration seek to address gender inequality? This comes from SDGs 5 and 11.
Well, to put it simply, gender inequality prevents our people from reaching their full potential. And that's the way in which it is limiting. I think in Anguilla and around the world, there is the current misconception that gender equality refers to issues that are affecting women. But gender inequality refers to both issues that are affecting women and men. And it is important for us to focus on both. In Anguilla, what I believe our IPM administration is going to focus on is looking at the matters that affect men and boys. One such issue is the unequal educational achievement of our young boys. When you look in our system and our school systems, there is a problem with the instruction style that is hard for boys to adapt to. And that is one of the overwhelming challenges they have. One thing that we have to do moving forward is to encourage more male teachers to go into the education system. We need those role models. And part of what we have to do is to encourage our young males to go into that profession. That's part of the relearning of gender roles, saying that men, yes, you can too be teachers. We know that in Anguilla, most teachers are female. I want to congratulate men like Mr. Neil Gums, Mr. Conloy Gums. We have some young male role models, but we still need more because we want our young men to reach that level of educational achievement. Secondly, when it comes to women, we see that there is also the lagging behind in areas like technology, robotics, STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So we want to be able to encourage our young girls on a more holistic basis to also get into those programs. Now, I know that it is increasing, but what we have to do is to use our teachers as a method of breaking the gender roles in our society. And when I say that, I mean we have to equip our teachers with the language to reprogram societal gender roles. To be able to accomplish this, what we need to do is work with the gender affairs unit in the government of Anguilla to provide support to our school and our teachers in relation to that language. Oftentimes, our teachers act as a buffer between the parents and the children. And to show a good example of how teachers can change behaviors, can change mindsets, if you look at the St. Mary's preschool, they have a no sugar policy. So it means that you can't bring anyone there. But what you have to do going forward, it forces you to rethink the way you think about nutrition. So we need to do that for gender roles. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kentish Rogers. Mr. Banks, I'll repeat the question one more time.
Yeah.
In what ways is gender inequality a barrier to sustainable development? And how would your administration seek to address gender inequality? SDGs 5 and 11.
Gender inequality is very important because it is actually number 5 on the list of SDGs. And as a consequence, it must mean that it has been a challenge in many other parts of the world. As far as Anguilla is concerned, the issues with gender equality are not as severe as in other parts of the world. We have, of course, a gender department in the Ministry of Home Affairs that is working with those issues and is very active. And as Ms. Kentish pointed out, gender issues don't only relate to women, it relates to men as well. And we have situations where in Anguilla, young men are at risk. They're a serious challenge for us to deal with as a government. These are issues that we must address. And we continue to address them in various ways. It's important that we put programs in place to make sure that our young men are counseled and guided in the right direction, that make sure that they have pastimes that are wholesome, ensure that they develop wholesome ideas and principles about life. In terms of the programs for women, they continue to participate in every sector of the society. And we continue to recognize women in every aspect of our lives. They have been, in the case of Anguilla, the women have always been in forefront of every change in Anguilla. From the revolution coming up to this period, they've always been the forefront of human development in our country. But gender equality is a critical issue for sustainable development, because if we have a considerable portion of our population who are not being treated well, who are not being treated equally, we are decreasing our ability to contribute towards our economic development. So we must put everybody on an equal footing so that we can all contribute equally and we can all be able to survive with this economy and contribute to our national development.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. I'll now allow 2 minutes for rebuttal or to share further information if you so wish.
Thank you. Part of what is important going forward is there's a messaging that's also important in gender equality. And when I talk about a message, I'm saying we look at those who are in authority as a message to what we can achieve. That's a very common thing around the world. And in Anguilla, the top and the senior positions are filled by men. The Commissioner of Police, the Governor, the Attorney General, and the Honorable Premier. And that's not an indictment on men, but it is saying that it is time for us to rethink, to shift, and to see how we can address these issues. Part of it is getting more women to step forward and get involved in politics. And thankfully, we have seen an increase in women this year. But it's important that that continues to increase, because what happens is when you have women in the legislature, they can speak to issues that affect women, which it's not to say that men don't know about, but they're not in tune with these particular issues. And just for instance, when I'm talking about things like period poverty, around the world, this is a standing issue, that women don't have the enough money to purchase pads on a monthly basis. And it's ironic because condoms are for free. And that's something, I mean it very seriously though, because that's something that comes with biology that women can't control, but sex is a choice. So we really need to think about how do we prioritize things in our legislature. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Banks, 2 minutes.
Yeah, I don't agree with Ms. Kentish that women are not in the top echelons of service or public service. As she mentioned, they're teachers, so they have a great influence on men and children, young men and girls. They're in key departments of government. They're in their legislature. They have been there for years, and it's important that we continue to encourage them. Of course, the system in which we operate from time to time, they are reluctant to come out and get involved in certain positions, particularly in the political arena, because of the nature of the political arena. These are things that we as a people must seek to change. When people expose themselves to politics, they enter a fishbowl and everybody's looking at them and everybody's trying to find reasons to put them down. The consequence, that's a challenge for many women. Women are easily set upon in situations like those. So these are the things that affect gender equality and the willingness of women to come forward and participate in certain areas of work, areas and professions, and so on and so forth. So it's important that, that we recognize that. The government of Anguilla has always been inclusive when it comes to issues related to women, and we will continue to be.
Moving on to question number 4. In addition to more frequent storms, droughts are expected to affect Anguilla's aquifers and soils. What measures would you put in place to protect Anguilla's water supplies and to ensure food security at a national level? SDGs 2, 6, 11, and 13. One more time. In addition to more frequent storms, droughts are expected to also affect Anguilla's aquifers and soils. What measures would you put in place to protect Anguilla's water supplies to ensure food security at a national level? SDG 2, 6, 11, and 12. You'll be given 1 minute. Mr. Banks will begin. You will be given 1 minute to prepare. That has been 1 minute. I will repeat the question one more time, and then we'll start with Mr. Banks. In addition to more frequent storms, droughts are expected to also affect Anguilla's aquifers and soils. What measures would you want to put in place to protect Anguilla's water supplies and to ensure food security at a national level? SDGs 2, 6, 11, and 13.
One of the key things to ensuring that we protect the aquifer is to make sure that we put in place a proper sewage system, sewage systems and a sewage system. We don't have a network of sewage systems throughout the populous areas, but we must insist on having proper sewage systems within every household. This ensures that the aquifers are not polluted, and put in place issues that relate to the management of the disposal of waste within the soils. Now, the government of Anguilla has done an excellent job in terms of protecting Anguilla's aquifer, and that is through the reverse osmosis system. We are not relying on the majority of our water from the aquifer. We're relying for most of our water from the reverse osmosis system. As a consequence, the water supplies within the aquifer are maintained for purposes for agriculture and so on and so forth. And this lends itself to food security as well. We have been making available to farmers reduced rates for water, because this is important for ensuring that their crops are taken care of in periods of drought. So that is critical. Water for irrigation is critical. Some farmers are being allowed to drill wells so that they can use water directly from the aquifer. As we move forward and continue to use more reverse osmosis, there will be more water in the aquifer for these farmers to access. We also need to secure land for our farmers. And we continue to find ways and means to make that available from government resources. But also we need to encourage farmers to seek other sources of land. There are a number of persons on the island with large tracts of land that can be made available to them, that they can acquire for those purposes. And since farming can become a business, it's important that you have a business rate for the lease of those properties in place. And also, we need to support the technology. The technology will determine how we protect our aquifer, because the reverse osmosis technology is important in doing that. Also, the technology in agriculture, in providing for the production of certain crops that don't require land space, but also can be done in drip irrigation, hydroponics, and the like. So these are elements that can be put in place, but certainly we need to begin with making sure that we have sewage systems in place that protect the pollution of the aquifers, and also we have water available for irrigation for farmers.
Thank you. I'd like to repeat the question one more time, and then we will go straight into Ms. Kentish Rogers. In addition to more frequent storms, droughts are expected to also affect Anguilla's aquifers and soils. What measures would you put in place to protect Anguilla's water supplies and to ensure food security at a national level? SDGs 2, 6, 11, and 13.
One of the major challenges going forward for Anguillians is the increasing pressure on our systems because of climate change due to extreme storms and droughts. And one of the impacts that this climate change is also causing is rising sea levels. And what rising sea levels are doing is that it is increasing the brackishness of our groundwater. So when our farmers are trying to produce crops, they find that the soil is losing nutrients. And when it's losing nutrients and it's becoming salty, it's affecting our yield production. So what we have to do going forward is we need to partner closely with other small island developing states to advocate for better representation internationally for climate action, because this is not a standalone project. It's not something we can fix by ourselves. Other and developing nations are having a massive impact on the climate change, the extreme storms that we're seeing in Anguilla. But furthermore, we need to take steps towards properly enforcing our climate change policy. And I want to be careful here because we do suggest a lot of policies. Different parties and governments, they have gone through suggesting policies for climate change renewal. But the issue that we're having in Anguilla is actually enforcement of climate change protection and policies. So moving forward, especially for food security in Anguilla, what we really need to do is to think outside of the box. And thinking outside the box, in addition to acquiring land, it means we need to be able to think, how do we use the limitations that we have and make a benefit out of it? One way of doing this is a project that's being piloted in other countries like Turkey, is something called Farmovation. So what would have taken 40 acres of land, they now put into a building much smaller, and they have like a hydroponic system that runs vertically. So you're able to produce more in a smaller space. And that is something that we have to start thinking about and championing here in Anguilla, because we already know that we're limited in relation to land resources. We're limited we have challenges in relation to pest control. When you talk to farmers, one of the biggest issues they face is pest control. And that is something that can be eliminated when we think outside of the box. Thank you.
I would like to take this time quickly to remind the audience, both live and listening to us via the internets, please do feel free to send in your questions. You can send those questions to axayouthcouncil@gmail.com. I'll say that one more time, axayouthcouncil@gmail.com. We shall have the questions posted, rebutted shortly, and then we shall have the questions that you all send in. We're going to move right into the rebuttal, starting with Mr. Banks.
Well, not necessarily to rebut, but to point out that the question is, what measures would you want to put in place to protect Anguilla's water supply and to ensure food security?
Audience.
And I appreciate the manner in which the Miss Kentish Rogers dealt with the wider issue, and the wider issue is important as well. But in terms of what we do in Anguilla, she raised one important point, and that's the issue of pest control. It's important that we find a way to challenge that area for food security. But in terms of water supplies and the protection of the aquifer and our soils, it's important that we continue to find ways and means to allow the aquifer to remain for farming purposes and use the ocean for reverse osmosis, because the salting of the aquifer, the salt in the aquifer, comes from over pumping, and it's important that we don't embark on too much over pumping for the normal consumption of water, but rather allow the aquifer as a source of water for farmers. We can control and manage that in that way. With regards to pest control, that's a critical issue as well, and that is something that we, as at the national level, continue to support by allowing farmers to import pesticides at customs without duty, and ensure that the pesticides, there must be some regulation on those pesticides as well. We cannot allow people to import pesticides because they like them or they believe they're effective. They must be used in a regulated way, that we do not bring pesticides which can have the reverse effect on food security, because it will create, it can affect and pollute the food supply.
Ms. Kentish Rogers.
Yes, thank you. In this question, we are touching on two issues, both water security, water supplies, and food security. In my answer, I really did touch on food security. And the reason why I touched on food security is because that's the pressing issue. Water is also a pressing issue for Anguilla. And without repeating what my opponent said in relation to managing or having proper sewage management, I'd like to bring to his attention that my opponent and his team have been boasting about 24/7 water, which is not the reality for most of the farmers in Anguilla. And part of this is about being very honest with the people of Anguilla of the current situation. And we have to do that so that we can actually find proper solutions moving forward. Because we know that water is a challenge. We know that we have drought. We know that the cost of water is one of the material issues in the production of water in Anguilla because of the cost of electricity. So if we are to move forward and to move forward sustainably, we have to deal with some matters before we jump straight to protecting Anguilla's water supplies. We also have to reduce the cost of production of water. So going forward, I just want to say that both issues tie into one another. Thank you.
We now move to question number 5. Question 5 reads, outline 3 innovative ways in which the Anguillan economy can be recharged, exclusive of foreign investment. I'll repeat. Outline 3 innovative ways in which the Anguillan economy can be recharged, exclusive of foreign investment. And these touch on SDGs 8 and 9. You have 1 minute to prepare, after which we'll begin with Ms. Kentish Rogers. I'll repeat the question one last time before Ms. Kentish Rogers addresses it. Outline 3 innovative ways in which the Anguillan economy can be recharged, exclusive of foreign investment. This touches on SDGs 8 and 9.
Thank you. One of the main ways in which we can move forward, well, one of the ways, innovative ways in which our economy can be recharged is actually quite simple. And it deals with population increase. I know that this is an issue that a lot of politicians try to stray away from, but the reason why we talk about population increase, which ties into creating proper jobs and new industries, is that when we increase our population, we increase the opportunities that are there for our local entrepreneurs. We increase the amount of foot traffic in their businesses, because once you have more people spending money. That money then goes into businesses. The businesses are able to expand. Those businesses, once they're able to expand, they spend more money. They contribute to the economy through the interim stabilization levy, through payments in Social Security, through their spending power. So it's a domino effect. And while I say increasing our tax base by increasing our population, we have to do it very carefully. We have to do it first by seeking to bring back home our Anguillians in the diaspora who are waiting to come home. And we have a lot of people who have left Anguilla. The brain drain problem is a real issue in Anguilla. And before we talk about selling passports, we have to talk about getting our people to come back home, to be empowered to take our resources and make use of them. Then we move to see how we can have merit-based immigration into Anguilla with those who have the skills that we really need in expertise. And then the third leg is to allow those individuals who have entrenched themselves in our community to be able to have their families here, because remittances is a big part of how money leaves our economy. And then that means that we don't have that money circulating within the Anguillan economy. So when you bring people here, and as people like to say, once you bring the wife to the home, the wife spends. So that's one aspect of recharging our economy. But another part, which touched on what I said previously, is government being there for creating export markets through government assistance in negotiating trade agreements and having a proper manufacturing policy and import substitution policy in place. And finally, in terms of economic growth, we have to take advantage of new industries in tech, in agriculture, in STEM, engineering, and mathematics. Thank you.
Mr. Banks, I'll repeat. Outline 3 innovative ways in which the Anguillan economy can be recharged, exclusive of foreign investment.
Well, it's always a challenge for a country to develop without foreign investment. I'm not sure whether the ways that we bring to address recharging an economy exclusive of foreign investment are innovative. They have been around for a long time. You must have the local support for financing, and one of those ways of financing the economy is through the indigenous banks. And that's why it was important for the government of Anguilla to strengthen our indigenous banks, because access to investment for the development of our country is available to those banks. And a number of Anguillians were able to survive because they were supported in their undertakings through our indigenous banks. So we have to rebuild and strengthen our indigenous banks and put them in a position so that they can support the Anguillan economy exclusive of foreign investment. We cannot really survive without foreign investment, but if we need to recharge it at the time when For example, during this COVID period, we need to provide for businesses and for jobs for people. It's important that the indigenous banking sector is able to respond to that. Also, to use the knowledge-based sector for e-business. So persons who live in Anguilla, who want to establish businesses, which can be managed from Anguilla in the outer world. A number of persons have taken advantage of the opportunity during this COVID period by being able to do things online, being able to make money online. And these are opportunities for bringing money back in the economy. Also, the mention was made of government support. Government must be in a position to support the local economy in ways that it continues to do so. And certainly during this period, in our effort to recharge the economy, we have put measures in place to make sure that persons who are out of work can sustain themselves even marginally for a period of time, but also to provide the opportunity for them to be able to get startup funding for the projects, for the businesses that they already have. So recharging the economy with innovative ways, exclusive of foreign development, is a challenge. By the end of the day, it relates to very basic principles, very basic methods that exist. Using the local bank to finance opportunities for local businesses, using knowledge-based industries so that you can expand your horizons for business outside of Anguilla, and also government support directly in areas where there is need for the economy to be subsidized.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Ms. Candice Rogers, you have 2 minutes to share further information or to rebut to Mr. Banks' statements.
Okay. I'm going to turn that off. I think it's important when we think about innovative ways to stimulate our economy that we look. Yes, it is important for us to look to our banking institutions for the support needed to get our entrepreneurs off the ground. Now, the problem is that in Anguilla, we've been in a sticky situation with our banks where the people of Anguilla have lost trust in our banking institutions, and getting access to loans has been very difficult. What has happened in our banking institutions is that they've been almost like a piggy bank. So you go in, what you put in is what you get out, and nothing else. And that's been very difficult that's been very difficult in Anguilla. But what we have to do is look at new ways of bolstering our financial services sectors in Anguilla. And one thing that Anguillians have already been doing is we are a very resilient people. And you can see through the formation of the Liberty Credit Union that Anguillians are already saying that we need to poise ourselves to take back control of financial institutions in Anguilla. And we need to encourage that kind of development so that we can once again retain equity in our financial institutions, so that when Anguillians decide to develop, to go into business, to extend, which in agriculture and in the knowledge-based sectors, they have an institution that they can depend on and that they can bank on in helping them achieve those goals. So moving forward, I think it's important that we build trust and we look to see how we can do that sustainably.
That concludes the structured questions.
Oh,
Sorry, Mr. Banks.
Thank you very much. I disagree with my opponent regarding, first of all, her idea of increasing the population. I believe the population should be increased, but that doesn't help to recharge the economy at this time. It's important that that be an ongoing process of increasing our population. Our population increase is critical for Anguilla's development. But in terms of recharging the economy, we must have the jobs available for those persons who are coming back to work, whether they are people or persons from other places.
I'm sorry, Mr.
So-
Banks. Sorry, I'm going to pause you right there. Ladies and gentlemen, please be respectful. Please be respectful. Mr. Banks?
So population increase is not sufficient. You've got to have ways and means of putting finances into the economy so that jobs can be created. And our local banks are not piggy banks, you know. And if you start credit unions, you're gonna have the same problem that we've had with people who impacted the banks. And that is when you borrow money from a bank, it needs to be paid back. It's a critical issue of the banking sector. And you borrow money. And that has been the challenge that we have faced. And don't get me wrong, persons who have not been able to pay back do not intentionally, in most cases, do not want to pay back. But the economy at the time created that problem. So we have to accept that that is the issue. But we also must accept the fact that we cannot blame our banks, or we cannot blame somebody who's trying to sort out the banking sector if you are one of those persons who are unable to meet your commitments. Meeting your commitments to a bank are critical to making them work. And that's why I said it's important that the banking sector, the indigenous banking sector, and we mentioned exclusive foreign investment. Foreign investment can come through international commercial banks. But local banks are the ones where we can get the local investment.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Ladies and gentlemen, I know we're trying very hard to be respectful. We are trying hard, aren't we? Thank you. We are now going to move into the questions from the audience. I'd like Jibber to begin with question number 1.
Just as a reminder, for these additional questions, each candidate will be given 2 minutes to answer each question from the audience, with a minute rebuttal if so desired. Starting now. Can you list some of the issues within your district and elaborate on how you intend to address them? One more time. Can you list some of the issues within your district and elaborate on how you intend to address them? We're going to be starting with Mr. Banks. We'll give 1 minute for preparation. That was 1 minute. I will ask the question one more time, and then we'll start with Mr. Banks. Can you list some of the issues within your district and elaborate on how you intend to address them?
Well, in addition to the social issues that are part of the overall process of development, we also have the fact in District number 4 that we have a lot of negative projects that can create negative impacts on the community. We have Anguilla, we have the airport, we have radio antennas, we have the dump site, we have the fuel depot. So in our district, we have a lot of things that people don't want in their backyard. How will you address these issues? First of all, the dump site in particular. We must continue to put in place a land management, waste management system that corrects some of the ill effects that comes from the dump site. And there are several. They come from a result of fly infestation, from effluence from burning, and a whole range of things. So this is something that is critical to be fixed. Then we have the fuel depot. We have to put in place a proper system of disposing of fuel in that district. One of these days we can have a serious calamity in that area. So that is something we have to put a proper bulk station in place. And that is something that going forward, the government, the Anguilla United Front government hopes to address. The airport expansion is also a critical project. And it's important that we make sure that that facility is in place in a manner in which it does not impact the surrounding areas, and it serves to ensure that we can have access to the outside world. So these are critical issues that we need to address in that movement for. And ANGLEC, we have to move towards renewable sources of energy so that we can have less reliance on fossil fuels, which the effluence from which can sometimes cause challenges to the community as well.
Thank you. Ms. Kentish Rogers, I'll repeat the question one more time, and then we'll go with you. Can you list some of the issues within your district and elaborate on how you intend to address them?
There are a number of issues that exist in District 4, in addition to the ones that my opponent mentioned. But the ones that I want to talk about are in relation to our people, the people of District 4. One issue that we have in District 4 is the problem with our existing athletic structures. The athletic structures in District 4 have been in disrepair for a long period of time. And when you walk around the district and you talk to the young people and they tell you that they want an athletic center, that they want a basketball court, that they want the support to have these facilities in Anguilla, which they are not getting, what we need to do, and which they are getting injuries from, instead of engaging in activity that helps them. So what I intend to do is to retrofit our existing athletic structures so that they are safer for use for our young people, so that they don't walk away with injuries that impact them for a lifetime. Secondly, District 4 has probably one of the richest musical talents in the entire island. And when I did some research, especially with the bands in our district, they tell me that it takes about 20 to 40,000 US dollars for them to entertain Anguillians for Carnival. And they get about 2,500 EC dollars for parade, when the truck itself costs 15,000 US dollars. And after they've paid off this debt, they have to start all over. And we complain in Anguilla about late music, but our bands are not being supported while they shoulder the burden of putting on carnival events for us. None of them can do music as a full-time career. What I propose is that we take the Lancer Bowl Cultural Center, we turn it into a multi-purpose center that we can rent out at a really, really low rate to our bands so that they can make money from admissions and they can capitalize on that so they can move forward. And in the long term, I want to move forward to the proper zoning of District 4 as a commercial center and cultural and historic center so that we can have proper foot traffic in the valley, and we can have a proper city center where our tourists can come to. Thank you.
Okay. We will now allow 1 minute for rebuttal, starting with Mr. Banks.
Can you repeat the question?
One more time the question. Can you list some of the issues within your district and elaborate on how you intend to address them?
Yeah. I think that Ms. Kentish responded to one issue within the district. which I can agree with and support, and that is the creation of electric structure in the area. But the other issues that you raised about bans and so on, so that's general around the island. I didn't want to raise issues that were widespread in the island. We could all make play about that. But at the end of the day, the key issues for me will be issues that affect District Number 4. And those issues for me are the fact that we have a dump site there, which is a dangerous issue for the community that needs to be dealt with, and successive governments have tried to work with it. We have got to focus a lot of attention because we have a growing population to make that a viable landfill site or put in place whatever technology is important to make that not as impactful on the community as it is right now in a negative way. And the fuel depot, that's important. So I think that with regards to the athletic issues, we have all worked to make sure that we have athletic facilities throughout the island, and we will reach the Ray Hill. We are there. Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Kentish Rogers, you have 1 minute.
So we are talking about issues in the district, and a part of the district are the people who exist in that district. So we can't ignore the district all the time. It's not always about pretty structures. But when I talked about the music talent, that goes for itself because District 4 is the home of many bands in Anguilla. But when we look at things like the athletic structures, that has been a promise in my opponent's manifestos from election to election. And the problem is that there has been no change. And the young people in the district are tired of hearing promises from politicians that they don't intend to keep. If you can't keep the promise, don't make it. And when we move to a place like in District 4, like Ray Hill, where my team and I have just retrofitted the court with solar lights. And this is something that has been put in place by a previous minister, the basketball court in Ray Hill. But we need to think very carefully about what our politicians say and what our politicians do. And that's why we say change can't wait.
Thank you. We now move to question number 2. Please. Thank you. We move to question number 2. Anguilla has changed from a regulated jurisdiction to a compliance. The numbers at the registry is down 95%. How do you intend to boost financial services? I'll repeat. Anguilla has changed from a regulated jurisdiction to a compliance jurisdiction. The numbers at the registry is down 95%. How do you intend to boost financial services? Ms. Kentish Rogers, you will begin after.
Can you ask there was something?
I'll repeat, this is a question from the audience.
Yeah, I know, but you missed something.
Anguilla has changed from a regulated jurisdiction to a compliance jurisdiction. The numbers at the registry is down 95%. How do you intend to boost financial services? Okay, Ms. Kentish Rogers, 2 minutes.
Financial services in Anguilla have had a really hard time in recent history. We've moved from a position where we've lost a bit of our international standing because of what happened to our offshore banks, and that has impacted investor confidence in coming into Anguilla, especially in the companies registered companies are coming here and they're finding it very hard to open banks in Anguilla, and that is a big problem that we're having, even in the legal field, in the company's registry field. You find companies not wanting to go through the hassle of dealing with opening accounts in Anguilla or registering businesses here in Anguilla. But what we have to do is once again make Anguilla an attractive market for financial services by showing them that our banking institutions are strong and that the banking environment can support business ventures. At the moment, some of our banking transactions, especially when it comes to international payments, we have our locals and our foreigners having difficulty with the processing of international transactions. And in order for us to really regain a foothold in financial services, we have to fight for our banks to make sure that they are strong and resilient and that they can stand on the international market once again as a beacon for the Caribbean. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Banks, I'll repeat the question one more time.
Yeah.
Anguilla has changed from a regulated jurisdiction to a compliance. The numbers at the registry is down 95%. How do you intend to boost financial services?
First of all, I'm very confused by the question. Change from a regulated jurisdiction to a compliance jurisdiction. I believe there's something sinister about that statement. Somebody's playing the devil's advocate. But basically, it is a fact that we are a regulated jurisdiction and we are compliant. We are compliant because to survive in the international environment and financial services, you have to step up to certain rules, best practices and guidelines, which you have signed on to. And this is, of course, as Ms. Kentish pointed out, making it very difficult for transacting business, opening accounts and so on and so forth. But we don't form banks in Anguilla, as she suggested. We don't form banks. But in terms of financial services, in Anguilla, we are searching for niche markets. And we have successfully put ourselves in the area of distributed ledger technology, blockchain, and so on and so forth. And we have in place legislation for regulating cryptocurrency, initial coin offerings, and a whole range of products that Anguilla is at the cutting edge of this sector in the industry. We are probably one of the jurisdictions in the Caribbean that is most advanced in this area. So this will become a brand new market opportunity for us if we continue to pursue it in the way that we are. And we're getting a lot of support from the UK government in terms of their support for the initiative within the financial services sector, because you know that financial services is regulated with the oversight of the UK government. And of course, internationally, we have to live up to certain guidelines. So it is a critical area to be in, but it is the jurisdiction which is well regulated, and that's why we are compliant, but it's a sector which is very, very challenging.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Ms. Kentish, you have. Anguilla has changed from a regulated jurisdiction to a compliance. The numbers at the registry is down 95%. How do you intend to boost financial services? You have 1 minute.
Thank you. As my opponent has said, in relation to new technologies like blockchain, which he wants to go into, and I understand that. But what I was trying to say in relation to our banks is that it's important for us to keep a good reputation, because reputation in banking is everything. And that impacts upon our ability to go forward, to move to new industry, to move to blockchain or whatever other marketing or financial services that we are going to be employing. Our banking sector and the resilience of our banking sector is something that investors are going to go and check upon. They're going to go and do a Google search, and they're going to check on what is the banking sector in Anguilla. How resilient is it? So moving forward, we have to think about our financial services sector and developing it in terms of re-establishing a firm foothold and a firm standing of our banks. That is an important aspect. And I know that my opponent spared no words, but I meant establishing in relation to banking. But that's fine. This is a debate. At the end of the day, we are supposed to do what we have to do to protect Anguilla and to forge into new industries. Thank you.
Mr. Banks?
I agree with Ms. Kentish Rogers that people look at your banking situation before they invest in your country or before they take us serious. If I'm paraphrasing her wrongly, but at the end of the day, she's saying that we have fallen down in that area. And that is why we resolve the indigenous banks. That is why it was important to resolve the indigenous banks. And it seems to me, as in terms of what the Anguilla People's Movement is intending, that they will make progressive movement. Yeah, progressive movement is intending is that we do further damage to our image by undoing the banking resolution, which has to date been very, very successful in responding to the needs of our community. And the reason why we have persons interested in investing in Anguilla, not necessarily in the financial services sector, but it is because we have a vibrant and stable banking sector as a result of the resolution process. You cannot have your cake and eat it too, Ms. Kentish. If we're gonna have a vibrant financial services sector, we must have a strong indigenous banking sector, and that was the objective.
All right. We would like to thank the audience for their enthusiasm, but we must remember we are here to hear the points of the contestants. If your mouths are moving, your ears aren't walking, candidates. So please keep your voices down. If I'm having trouble hearing them, so are you. Moving right along, we have a few more questions. Here we go. In Anguilla, there is a disconnect between development and enforcement of policies. What do you consider to be the biggest barrier to enforcing policies? And if you are elected to office, how do you intend to address the problems of the lack of enforcement? One more time. In Anguilla, there is a disconnect between development and the enforcement of policies. What do you consider to be the biggest barrier to enforcing policies? And if you are elected to office, how do you intend to address the problems of lack of enforcement? I'll give 1 minute for preparation, and then we'll start with Mr. Banks.
Can you repeat the question one more time?
One more time for Mr. Banks. In Anguilla, there is a disconnect between development and enforcement of policies. what do you consider to be the biggest barrier to enforcing policies? And if you are elected to office, how do you intend to address the problem of lack of enforcement?
You mentioned the word policies, the enforcement of policies. And policies must be enabled by legislation. So in areas where development runs counter to the enforcement procedures that are required, you need stronger legislation. One of the areas of development is physical planning and land use. That's a critical area for development because it does exactly what Ms. Lake Kentish mentioned in terms, Kentish Raz mentioned in terms of zoning. It's important that we put in place a physical planning act. And we have been challenged with this for many, many years, going back to 2007, when the first physical planning bill was put before the government, the people of Anguilla. And that failed because Anguillans were resistant to the idea of putting those policies in place. Those policies with the legislation would allow for penalties when persons do not adhere or comply with the legislation that's in place. So the enforcement requires legislation, and so we have to pay close attention to the policies we have in place. Those policies must be developed in conjunction with legislation that has teeth to make sure that they enforce. And that is why physical planning is critical for development, because when people come to a country and want to do certain projects, we have got to make sure that the planning requirements are in place, that we adhere to the environmental sustainability objectives, goals of government. These must be a part of the legislation and the policies we put in place.
The question one more time, and then we're going to have Ms. Kentish Rogers. In Anguilla, there is a disconnect between development and enforcement of policies. What do you consider to be the biggest barrier to enforcing policies? And if you are elected to office, how do you intend to address the problems of lack of enforcement?
So I believe that one of the biggest problems we have in Anguilla in relation to development and enforcement is that there is a lack of trust that exists within the Anguillian community to some government policies. So, for instance, when it comes to the enforcement of a tax regime, there is also the paired system of statistics that will come around and they'll ask for information, but because Anguillians don't trust, they don't give accurate and honest information. So we need to reestablish that trust, but part of reestablishing that trust means that we have to have a transparent, open, and accountable system of governance so that people don't feel as though that information is being used for a purpose other than its prescribed use. Another issue that we have in terms of enforcement and development is we have things like memorandums of understanding, and in these memorandums of understanding, there's supposed to be provision for the development of the island. So there's social component to these MOUs, but these social components are not enforced. So once again, there's a disconnect, and the people aren't seeing the fruits of development as a result of these investments. When we look at physical planning, We see that people are distrustful again because there are variances across the island. What physical planning requires from one place to one next seems to differ, and that is a big problem in relation to enforcement of practices. You can't ask someone to have 15 parking spaces one place in terms of a business, and then another business only has 4. If your requirement is 4, it is supposed to be 4. So we have a disconnect between enforcement and development, and it varies across the island because government is not putting its foot down. Thank you.
All right, we're going to now allow for 1 minute for rebuttal or additional information, starting with Mr. Banks.
Yeah, I'm not clear what Ms. Kentish Rogers means by lack of trust, because it's clear that if you're required to give statistics for the better management of your country, there should not be an issue of trust. You should not suspect that anybody is going to use them for any other purpose. It's important that we recognize that this is a country of laws. And if the issue that she referred to, I don't know, you always compare apples with oranges. The physical planning bill, that legislation makes it clear, and we don't have legislation in place that is clear enough, because for 70, 60, 15, 13 years, we have been struggling to put a physical planning bill in place because persons, especially landowners, do not want to be told how to manage their land, and it impacts other persons within the community.
And now, Ms. Rogers.
Thank you. I'm going to disagree with my opponent in relation to statistics because I've had conversations with the statistics department, and that is a challenge that they have in Anguilla. So it's important for our politicians to have conversations with our departments to understand the reality of the issues that they're facing, because getting information and accurate information from the Anguillan public is a challenge. Another thing that we have to look at is the implementation of legislation without legs. And when I talk about that, I'm referring to one issue that we had in Anguilla, which is in relation to price control regulations. And when we have price control regulations and we put them in place and then we don't enforce, then it is for naught. Because if you don't tell a retailer to say, if your price needs to be capped at 50, and they don't cap it at 50, and you don't go back to enforce it, you don't employ the manpower to then go and enforce those laws, it is legislation without legs. So we have to do that when we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you both. We are winding down to our last 2 questions. The next question reads, due to the pressing need to address climate change, what actions will be taken to prevent overfishing and depleting resources as we move toward expanding our fishing industry? I'll repeat. Due to the pressing need to address climate change, what actions will be taken to prevent overfishing and depleting resources as we move towards expanding our fishing industry? I'll give you both time to prepare. I'll repeat the question. Due to the pressing need to address climate change, what actions will be taken to prevent overfishing and depleting resources as we move towards expanding our fishing industry? You have 2 minutes, Ms. Kentish-Rogers.
Thank you. So some of the initiatives that can be used to prevent overfishing and the depletion of our stocks as we expand the fishing industry include the establishment of marine parks so that we can preserve our marine life, the establishment of coral nurseries, which will be there to promote the fish to promote fish to come to the area and to reproduce so that we can replenish our stocks, and have seasonal fishing. We'll have zones and areas that we will have as areas for development for our fish. And then we also create proper legislative frameworks for our fisheries department for the protection of our coral reefs when we want to build on our fishing stock, and that includes when our fisheries departments go out to sea, that they can actually police the waters in Anguilla. So when boats come to our shores and they drop their anchors in our coral reefs where our fish are laying their eggs, we actually have the legislation to stop them, for our fisheries department to actually issue fines and sentences there and on the spot. Because at the moment, the legislation doesn't have any teeth to give our fisheries department that kind of power, and we need to do that in order for it to be effective. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Banks, I'll repeat the question.
Yeah, I fully support the fact that there are responses now taking place with regards to overfishing, and we have well-established marine parks systems in place. We have well-established fisheries department that is working to put together legislation to ensure that there is no overfishing, of course, and observing certain aspects of the spawning period for certain fish. And also, what is critical at this time, two things: the resources, that is technical, as well as boat that can assist the proper surveillance of our waters, as well as improving on the legislation. That process is taking place as we speak. So I think we're in a good place with regards dealing with the issues of overfishing and the depletion of our resources. So we just have to continue along that vein.
Thank you. You wish to put anything further, Ms. Kentish-Rogers?
I just wanted to say that in Anguilla, what we also need to do in relation to overfishing is we need to have an open relationship between the government and the fisherfolk. And that needs to be a very trusting and open relationship so that when decisions are made, the fisherfolk can depend and trust on our government to make decisions that are both in the best interest for their industry and for the sustainability of fishing in the long run. And what we need to do moving forward is we need to really work on bettering that relationship between the fisherfolk and the government. Thank you.
Well,
Mr. Banks?
I want to object to Ms. Kentish-Rogers. The fisherfolk and the government have an excellent relationship.
Hello, please.
The issue that exists, which the APM has been playing upon, is the issue of the importance of regulation during our efforts to deal with the COVID pandemic. As a consequence, from time to time, you have to seek certain decisions, and when you work through and you have the dialogue, you can sort them out, and that's what was possible. We have an excellent relationship. I find no issue with fishermen. There are some fishermen, of course, who would differ, but I think we have an excellent relationship and continue to build on it.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are asking that there be no more outbursts or the organizers will have the room cleaned.
Thank you, thank you. We are at the last question, ladies and gentlemen. Let's finish it on a positive note. Everybody good? Okay. Here we go. The last question for this evening. Speaking to SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, what is your position on large-scale solar and wind and wave? One more time, speaking on SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, what is your position on large-scale solar and wind and wave power?
I fully support them. It's an important aspect of the government of Anguilla's renewable energy policy. It is something that is critical moving forward for energy generation and distribution. Our utility, which is going through some transformations at this time, must keep pace with the new methodologies and the new systems for renewable energy, and we must get investment in that area. We've had forays in the area of solar energy in our Anglic utility prior to Hurricane Irma, and we have seen the challenges that we've had because that facility was destroyed. So we need to look at ways and means of mitigating against the impacts that climate change and weather events like Irma could have on solar energy facilities. Wind energy, wave energy, and all these issues are critical aspects of the energy production within our island, within our utilities going forward. This would include the involvement of the private sector, consumers, in generating their own energy and selling it back to the utility for distribution island-wide. These are a lot of regulations that need to be put in place. These are things that the Anguilla United Front government of 2005, 2010 were heavily involved in, and we hope that we can continue with this government and the next to make sure that that's a part of the culture of energy generation in Anguilla for the future.
Thank you. The question one more time. Speaking to SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, what is your position on large-scale solar, wind, and wave power? Ms. Candice Rogers.
Thank you. I think it's important for us to move towards renewable energy, of course, but I'm very careful because renewable energy has been a buzzword that's been used by every politician before I was born. And for years we've been hearing about renewable energy, and it has never really happened in Anguilla. We've heard about the use of wave technology, which actually has a lot of benefits for our marine ecosystems, and they take a lot of power because of the currents in our channels, and that is a potential way of going forward and building our energy efficiency, but also looking at solar panels to power our country. But one thing that has commonly come up is about the fear that during a hurricane, we will have to pick up these thousands and thousands of panels. But what we have to do is break these things down into bite-sized goals. And I think that's part of the reason why people have been disillusioned with the political process, because promises have been made about renewable energy and nothing has been done. So what we have to do is first look at setting up test units. We can put solar panels on government offices or on schools, and we can power individual businesses, or we can allow businesses, to then use solar panels and tie back into the grid and sell the electricity back to the people of back to the electricity company. So it is important for us to look at renewable energy sources, but I believe that we have to break it down into bite-sized goals, because going full-fledged into saying we're powering the entire island is going to be likely very challenging given our fiscal situation. And so we need to find more believable ways and more realistic ways of getting to renewable energy. Thank you.
Thank you. Now both candidates will be given 1 minute to rebut, starting with Mr. Banks.
I'm not going to rebut, but I'm going to disagree with the fact that nobody is trying to do renewable energy in one go. And renewable energy in bite sizes have been existent in Anguilla for many, many years. Solar panels have been used for water heating in Anguilla way back as far as 1984. I have a solar panel in my house which we've had for 35 years. So that is a bite-size response to solar energy. And the other bite-size was when we put the 1 acre or the 1 megawatt facility at Anglick. Another bite-size was when Cuisinart put another plant at Cuisinart. And a number of persons are generating their own energy within the economy. So we continue to advance in this area of renewable energy. I don't think that there are any downsides to this. It's just to improve the technology and improve the installation to make them resilient to the impacts of hurricanes and proceed along that path. One of the challenges that we do face is with fossil fuels. Whenever fossil fuels reduce, the cost of fossil fuels are reduced, then they become more attractive than renewable energy, and we fall into that trap.
Ms. Kentish Rogers. 1 minute.
Could you just repeat the question, please? Sorry.
The question one more time. Speaking to SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, what is your position on large-scale solar, wind, and wave power?
Thank you. So as the question states, I was responding to what I thought about large-scale solar and wind power energy. And what I was responding to specifically was the need to break it down into bite-sized pieces, and particularly to seeing government lead from the front and start the process themselves. So not just saying to local producers and local hotels and local industries that you can go into solar, but also doing it to reduce the burden on the people of Anguilla, because we know that the cost of electricity hangs very heavily over the people of Anguilla. And it is a major bill for the government of Anguilla. So moving forward, what we really need to do is to take that initiative and put it into government offices. Thank you.
Thank you both. That was the end of our questions. I will allow both candidates 3 minutes to give a closing statement, beginning with Ms. Kentish Rogers.
Can you give me 1 minute?
Okay. I'll give you 1 minute to prepare yourself.
Ready? Ready? To the Anguilla National Youth Council, thank you for having me. To the listening and viewing audience, thank you for your attentiveness, sometimes your rowdiness, and your questions. To the Honorable Premier, I thank you for your many years of service. But the goal of every generation is to redefine the acceptable, as Charles Winslow taught his students. As we move Anguilla into the 21st century, we have to focus on how we can take the disadvantages we're faced with as a small island developing state and come up with cost-effective and innovative ways of solving our problems. It is moving our island from one of reliance to one of resilience. To the Spanish-speaking people of Anguilla, the APM is ready to integrate you into this community as you rightly deserve. Estoy lista. Estoy lista para representarte. Vota el bote en el día de las elecciones. Vota azul. I want Anguillians to remember the spirit of the revolution. 53 years ago, Anguilla was stagnant, and every Anguillian that made the consequential decisions that changed our path towards progress were mostly young people. Today, Anguilla is stagnant again, and as a daughter of the soil, I do not need 5 more years to get ready. I am ready right now to fight for the people of District 4 and the people of Anguilla to put this country back on a progressive path. To the people of my constituency, they have always been brave and bold. I'm asking you on election day to make the brave, bold, and best choice for Anguilla. We can't keep telling our young people to wait. It is not your time. Now more than ever is the time for young people to take up space, because the only thing that cannot wait is change. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kentish Rogers. Mr. Banks. Mr. Banks, I'll allow you 3 minutes for your closing statement.
Yeah, thank you very much, moderators and organizers of this event. It has been, as was promised, a very cordial encounter. It could have been much more adversarial. At the end of the day, we are here for the same purpose. We're here because we believe that we are in the best place to take Anguilla forward. Unfortunately, the Anguilla United Front is running on its record of achievement, of which we are extremely proud. And all the selective criticisms that have no relationship to the real progress that we have made in Anguilla, in a general sense, are of no value to your decision making. These are things that are in progress. There are a number of promises and platitudes which the Anguilla, the APM, is making, which have been made by successive governments, as my opponent pointed out. Parties, when they run for election, make promises with the understanding that they will be in a position to fulfill them. But at a time that is critical, it is important that you move forward with a party that has a record. I'm not saying that we are the only party that have a record, but I know we are the party with the good record. For the last 5 years, we have undertaken a number of challenges, beginning with the banking sector, which we are proud of. We have dealt with the restoration after Hurricane Irma, which we are extremely proud of. We turned around the economy within a year. We are proud of the restoration of the Capjaluca project. We created 350 jobs and business opportunities for the people of Anguilla as a result of our efforts. We are proud of what is happening now with the restoration of our public sector, the schools, the hospitals, the port development, and a range of things that are providing jobs for the people of Anguilla. We are, however, dwarfs on the shoulders of giants. I do not take full responsibility for where Anguilla is today, because those of us in this room, especially the young people, are not aware from first-hand experience of where we came from. But persons with that first-hand experience must understand that we have made great progress, and we are making great progress today. And that is why we have on board as well young people, because we believe they're important for the purpose, and we are proud of especially one of our young men who we brought in very early, and also that we created the opportunity for young persons like Mrs. Kentish Rogers to make a difference. Thank you very much. When you go out, we want you to reflect on these things and make a decision, and be sure at the end of the day you will make a decision that takes into account our record of achievement for the last 5 years.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Banks and Ms. Kentish Rogers. Ladies and gentlemen, we will see you tomorrow evening for our District 6 debates beginning at 7 p.m.